Welcome, everyone, to the Polarian series of webinars. Today's presentation, 5 Easy Steps to Accelerate and Improve Your QA Testing and Processes. Thank you for joining us, and we will commence shortly. At this point, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Andy Holden, Professional Services Team member. Andy is a systems engineer with Polarian Software and has been with us since 2011 and focuses on supporting our customers implementing the best solutions to their problems, leveraging Polarian's highly flexible open architecture. Andy's experience at quickly identifying and translating customer requirements and their nuances have served him well in working with many enterprise organizations across a wide range of sectors, including automotive, medical, and aerospace. He keeps a particularly close tap on the latest developments in agile and hybrid development best practices as they pertain to application lifecycle management, requirements management, and Q&A. Andy studies material science and engineering at UCLA, and I'd like to welcome Andy to our presentation today.
This is today's agenda. First things first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Polarian, a little bit about who we are and what we do. And then we'll go on to sort of the meat of the webinar, 5 steps to improving QA and testing. These are just sort of 5 easy steps, things that we've identified that are really some of the struggling points that teams have when it comes to performing quality assurance and testing. And we'll talk a little about not only what the problems are, but also what the solutions for those problems are as well, or what some potential solutions are for those problems as well. And we'll go into some demonstration scenarios. What I'll do is I'll try to illustrate some of these points by going into the Polarian QA tool and showing sort of exactly how we've done these or overcome these obstacles in the past with our customers. And then at the very end, we will have a Q&A session at the end. Any questions that you ask during the presentation, we will make sure to answer at that time. A little bit about Polarian. We were founded in 2004, and in 2005, we released the first unified 100% browser-based ALM solution. We have over 10 years focusing in this space, and in that time, we've amassed over 250 Fortune 1000 deployments. We have 2.5 million plus users, over 200 extensions, and 15,000 registered community members contributing extensions and participating on our forums and our community sites. Polarian does have a large global presence. Between ourselves, our partners, and our customers, we are present on 6 out of 7 continents in the world. We have reseller partners across the globe, and we do work with a large number of technology partners to bring integrated solutions between their tools and ours. Polarian does have a large amount of user-driven patented technology as well. We really strive to make our tool as easy and as intuitive to use as possible, and a lot of the technology we have really centers around that, being able to use Polarian as you would your already existing traditional tools. Enough with the talk about Polarian. Let's talk a little about 5 steps to improving QA and testing. First of all, what really is the importance of QA and testing? You know, of course, quality assurance is always important. You want to make sure that you're releasing a quality product, and even beyond some of the regulatory bodies and agencies that require very strict testing, there's obviously very good reasons for doing it well. In 2010, McAfee released an antivirus patch that caused tens of thousands of computers to crash and burn. Not only personal computers, but also many enterprise users were severely affected by this. And what they found was that there were some very specific steps in their quality assurance process that were not followed. They were not doing their standard peer review, and risk assessment of the drivers in question was not adequate. And then McAfee themselves said that they will put in place the processes. They will make sure we put the processes in place so this will never happen again. So you can see that even a small slip, something as small as just a quick antivirus definition patch can really cause some big problems if it doesn't go through the proper quality assurance processes, and if you don't ensure that all the processes that you have in place are being followed. All right, so what are the challenges with QA? And one of the things here that you notice is a lot of these don't necessarily actually have to do with the process of doing the testing. That's fairly mature and fairly well understood. A lot of it really has to do with how do we relate to the other teams in our organization. For example, are our requirements that we're developing untestable? Are they poorly written? Are we testing everything that we need to do? Right? Are we verifying all the requirements that we're supposed to be verifying? And a lot of times, why are we even running these tests? What is the purpose for running the tests that we are beyond just to go through this procedure? Are they verifying a certain thing? Are they mitigating a risk? What is the purpose of these tests? What impact do our tests have? So, if we fail a test, something fails, and maybe for a specific reason, what is the impact of that failure? And on the other side, are our test procedures still valid? Right. So if I'm running the test that I got the script to yesterday, how am I sure that between the time that I got my test procedure and the time that I executed the test, that my requirement hadn't changed in that time? Same thing, what happens if we're running the same test 3 times but in 3 different ways? And this can be either 3 different users who are running them, or 3 different engineers running in 3 different methods, or even using different sets of tools. If I am an automotive manufacturer, what if I do my tests on a hardware-in-the-loop bench versus actually doing them on a test platform, right? I'm running these tests, but how do I sort of correlate them together? And the biggest one, it's sort of funny, but we do hear this from our customers a lot, is really what's going on? How does this QA process, how does our work really fit into the bigger picture of the development process? And sometimes it's very nice to get a little bit of context of where you fit in the scope of things in order to do some much better work. So these are our main challenges here. And we'll start with the first one is, in terms of writing requirements and making sure the requirements are testable. One of the big challenges here comes from the fact that a lot of groups and a lot of teams really segregate their requirements management procedure, their development and release management procedures, and their quality assurance. On the very front end, we have our business analysts and business intelligence engineers who are working with the requirements, getting the marketing requirements, breaking them down into sort of user and system requirements, and sort of getting that high-level overview of what the product is going to look like. And at some point, they decide that they've done enough work with developing these requirements and fleshing them out, and they simply either save it to a Microsoft Word file or save it or export it from a requirements management tool and say, here you go, development. This is what you need to do. Come back to us if you have any questions. And the development gets it, and they take those system-level requirements and they break them down into their various design requirements. And if they have any questions, they go back, they send an email, or they have a design meeting. But for the most part, there's no real two-way interaction. And so the development breaks it down to the design. They start doing their development. They create a release, and finally they say, here you go, QA. Here's what you need to test. Either I'm giving you the test procedures as well, or you have to sort of write them from scratch. And QA gets the final the prototype product. They write their test procedures. They go through the testing, and then they get all their defects and they get their failures, and they send it back to development and say, all right, here you go. This is what you need. But there's really no communication between the 3 of them other than at these specific milestones, right? And that's one of the big problems, because in order to really have a good integrated development process, all 3 of these silos, all 3 of these groups really have to be collaborating with each other, almost in real time, right? The requirements management guys can't really write good requirements management without input from development and quality assurance. And it sort of goes with all 3. And so one thing that's come up recently, not so recently, but has become very popular, especially in software development, is this idea of test-driven development. And you'll see sometimes in agile teams, they'll write their user stories in a specific way where they say, I want to do something because this is why I want to do it, and I will know it is implemented with some test. Right. So, for example, I want to be able to use my microphone without setting it up because I have to give webinars. My audio quality is fairly bad, and I will know it is implemented when I am able to plug in a microphone and get good gain on my microphone without having to set anything up. Right. And so, in there is an explicit definition of what the test will be as part of the requirement. Right. So, not just what I wanted to do, but how do I know that it is implemented well. Right. And so, this idea of sort of test-driven development even gets taken to the logical extreme sometimes, where a lot of software teams will actually write the test even before the requirement. So my requirement isn't that my software must be able to boot up in 10 seconds. My requirement is sort of taken from the test case, that is, start the service, gather the time must be within plus or minus 0.5 seconds of 10 seconds, right? So that's really the requirement, is the test case. The requirement is that it fulfills that test case. And so even in pure hardware and development, right, this may not make a lot of sense in hardware and electrical development, because a lot of times you may not know exactly what you need to test before you actually have done the developments, right? It's not quite as nice as it is in software development, where I can sort of break it down into functions and really have some sort of black box and really know, oh, this is what's going in, this is what's coming out. However, even in hardware development, if we're talking about just pure hardware development, requirements must be testable, right? I can't give a requirement that says the car must be fast, because that car, that doesn't, it's untestable. What does fast mean, right? I can give a requirement that is the car must be in the top 10% of fastest cars in the world, because then now I have a specific test that I can run. Let's have the car go as fast as it can, get the number compared against all the cars in the world. And so that is really important, that your requirements are testable. Otherwise, they're almost meaningless. How do I verify that this requirement's been fulfilled if I can't test it? Right. And so this sort of comes back to our last slide with the silos, because a lot of times what we see is that there's this conflict between the development, QA, and requirements, because none of the three really know what it's like to be in the other silo. And so the requirements don't really know what it's like to be a test engineer. Test engineers don't necessarily know what it's like to be a developer. And so being able to share this wisdom, involving all of the sides in the requirements management process, can make things go a little bit smoothly, right? If I have a test engineer that is part of our requirements definition and our requirements approval, he should be able to look at my requirements list and say, okay, this one's not very good because I don't know how I'd be able to test this one. This one is good because I have a specific test in mind that would be able to verify that we passed this requirement. And so I no longer have to wait until the product sort of gets down in the food chain for the QA guys to send it back up to the requirement and say, hey, you got to change these requirements, otherwise we can't really test them. And so it saves a lot of time during that process, because there's a lot less going back and forth. It's sort of just bringing everyone together all at one time so that they can share their wisdom together. So the next one is really creating thorough test plans. And this comes back to where we're saying, why are we testing these test cases? What test cases are we testing? When are we testing them? And a lot of this comes down to, how do I relate all of the items within my product together, right? So I have my top level system requirements. I have my detailed component requirements, so my lower level, maybe my functional requirements, and I have my testing specification, right? And all of these relate together. There's a lot of them, right? You may have 1,000 system requirements, and each one of those has 500 component requirements, and each of those, for every component requirement, there's one test case, something along that lines, and all of them are sort of linked together, right? The system requirements are refined by my component requirements. Component requirements are verified by my test case. My test cases trigger my defects. And I may have 20 documents each of these: system requirements, component requirements, test specifications. So that a lot of data to sort through, again, and then all the other work tasks we have. But the question is, how do I know what test cases I need to run, right? How do I know that, well, first of all, how do I know what test cases I need to run? How do I know that I'm running all of the right test cases? And when it comes to doing sort of the initial and sort of the final testing, it gets a little bit easier, because the answer is sort of run all the test cases, right? Cover everything so that we're ensure that we're getting all entire coverage. But as we go through the middles, when I do change some of my system requirements and they feed down to my component requirements and some of those changes, how do I know what test cases I need to run, and how do I really plan those test cases? All right, so let's go on. And this comes down to really, creating traceability to my requirements, right? This is necessary for a lot of regulatory standards. So if you're working in medical, automotive, aerospace, a lot of these standards require you to prove that you have traceability, not only to the test case, but a lot of times even to the specific test result. But more importantly, it really gives the testers some context into why they are testing, right? If they get a test case that is, when I run a car into a wall at 25 miles per hour, the airbag should deploy, right? But knowing that is great, but it doesn't provide any context into why 25 miles an hour, right? Maybe it's that the National Highway Safety Board specifies that 25 miles an hour is the level that, airbags should deploy. Or maybe that internal research has found that 25 miles per hour is the most likely speed to get into an accident. But they wouldn't know unless they have some access to that requirement, or some access to more context other than just their specific test script. And secondly, knowing the meaning of these tests can really help catch issues that are not explicitly tested for, right? If we know that 25 hours is the threshold for igniting the airbag, right? What happens if, maybe the the seatbelts for some reason don't engage when you have a crash at 25 miles per hour, right? Not something that we're testing for, but it is a separate important issue that if the testers have some context can either know to look for or at least catch a glimpse of. What we see a lot of times with our customers is that many customers track sort of what we call two different types of issues. One are defects, which are really failures in test cases. This would be the airbag not deploying at 25 miles per hour. And then issues, which are sort of independently observed issues that aren't tied to a specific failure of a test case, but are something that a tester has observed in the field and maybe did not have somewhere to that specifically tested it. Right? And this would be the seatbelt that's not catching. And then lastly, having this context, having this information does allow the testers to provide more or better quality feedback. Right? When the tester actually executes the test, right, it's easy enough to say, okay, this passed, this fails, here are my results, I print them out from the computer. But it doesn't really give them anything that allows them to say, what do we think failed? What do we need to change for it? Is it a requirements issue? Is it a design issue? Where do we go looking for our defect? And so having the test engineer have that information, so knowing what the system requirement is, knowing what the designs were in place in order to ensure that this system requirement was executed properly, this allows them to say, hey, this happened, this is where the issue may be, right? Maybe he's wrong, maybe he's right, but at least it gives you a place to start. And again, this accelerates the feedback process, accelerates sort of your testing and validation procedures. Secondly, so not only giving your testers more information, but just knowing what items to test is quite important. First of all, knowing what requirements have changed can help greatly with test planning, simply because some requirements changes will need more testing than others, right? A change in the requirement at the very top level is probably going to propagate down to several test cases at the bottom. And it's probably likely that you'll have to execute all of those in order to ensure that one system requirement is being fulfilled. Whereas a slight change in the functional design may only need the re-execution of that specific test case. That's right. So it really depends on what your impact analysis is for the entire thing. But just as important as sort of knowing what needs to be tested, knowing what tests can be skipped, at least initially, can provide a lot more velocity and a much smoother verification validation process, because you're not testing the entire test procedure again. You're only testing the parts that really need to be done. For example, if I'm testing the airbag and the brake system change, right, it may not be necessary to test the airbags again. But if I do test them, so if I do test the brakes and I see that some test case that also validates the airbags has failed or something has changed, maybe I do need to go up. So having all this traceability, linking everything together, can really help you know what requirements or what tests need to be run again based on the changes that you've had in the past. Secondly, in planning is knowing if we can reuse any test procedures from before. So this is either test procedures in the same project or related maybe to a different system or something else, or even test cases in a different project. What we find in medical device companies especially is that they do have for a similar line of products, they have a very similar set of test cases. So a lot of times they don't write specific test cases for that device unless it's very low functional level requirements. Right? They'll usually take the same system and user acceptance test and run them again and again for all their various products along a model line or a specific use case. And so knowing what I can use, again, really accelerates my testing process and test planning. And lastly, these two are sort of similar, but just being able to report on what's going on with my test case right now. All my test plans, all my test cases, what is going on? Are we testing things that will be in conflict with another? Are we testing items that are already being tested, or even items that are already being changed sort of up the line, right? If I know a requirement is going to be changed in the next 5 days or is in the process of being changed, what's the point in testing it? Because my results are just going to be invalid anyways. All right. So just knowing that and having a little bit more insight into what's going on, not just in testing, but also in the requirements that are sort of controlling my test plan, is quite important. It gives a lot more flexibility. And then lastly, just giving testers or groups access to their plan. And this goes beyond just, handing them an Excel spreadsheet and saying, test this. Having some place where they can come in and they can see their plans and they can make their changes is important. Just, again, enhances the collaboration between your individual testers and the whole QA team as a whole. All right, so going on, again, sort of starting from where we ended a few slides before, again, knowing what has changed. When we have a large, this is 8,000 8,000 documents, each one of them with a 1,000 items within them. If I change one thing, how do I really know what ends up being changed down the line? And especially with more agile-based and more Scrum-like systems, we're not just changing requirements once, detailed components requirements once, test cases once. Everything's being sort of changed at the same time, and just keeping track of what's going on and what's being changed can be a very daunting task, right? And even then, with all the defects I create, maybe a quarter of them come back and change requests and just add more and more to the amount of items that we have to keep track of, right? And this comes down to just providing direct feedback, not just from the requirements engineers to the testers so they know what's been changed, but also from the testers to the requirements engineers, right? One of the things that we've found, and this is true for pretty much every report, not just when it comes to requirements to test cases, but results are only really reliable for one day, right? If I create a report, that is only as good as long as nothing changes in the system, right? So as soon as I come to office the next day, things may have changed, and my results are no longer valid, right? And so how do we guarantee that yesterday's requirements haven't changed and that the test results that we have are still good and they're still valid for my information? And again, this really comes back to establishing that traceability, making sure that I know my impact analysis when I'm changing my requirements, or that I know the impact analysis or know what impacts the test cases that I have. Right? And also vice versa, the test results can also give very valuable information to the development team. And again, this is something that the sooner it comes back, the better. Right? Having a system where all the results that I do, as soon as I do them, come back to the requirements engineer is quite useful, because now I don't have to waste any time going to a meeting, getting the results from my QA team, or getting it back in an Excel spreadsheet and trying to correlate, okay, this test case goes with this requirement, this test case goes with this requirement. And this comes back, knowing why the test has failed. Again, going back to, again, a few slides before, giving the test team a little more information can really help with this diagnosis process. And finally, sort of a summary of what's been said previously in this slide, any gap between creating the result or the change and reporting it is wasted time. If I have my results today at 4:30 and I say, okay, well, I'm almost done for the day, I'll just submit this tomorrow morning, right? Or I'll bring it up in the meeting that's going on Friday, right? All that time that I spend between creating the result and reporting it, that's all time that we could be using analyzing the results and making the changes that need to be changed, right? And so if I can just do that automatically, instantly, it saves a lot of that wasted time, even if I'm doing other stuff in the middle, right? If I'm doing other test runs, or even if I'm just continuing on the test procedure that I was doing. If I execute one test on Monday, why should I have to wait until Friday in order to report that information? One other thing when it comes to doing all these tests is really, how do I integrate tests from all methods? As you know, as anyone who does any sort of product development knows, there is not just one test method for testing the entire system. Unless it's a very simple product where I can test everything manually, test everything by hand. Everything goes through various testing procedures. In software, this may be your unit tests, your functional tests, your system level tests, and finally your user acceptance tests, right? In hardware, this may be you're going through your models, doing your hardware in the loop tests, doing individual component testing, and finally maybe the entire system testing, right? So they all have different methods. They all happen at different stages of the development, and some happen at the same stage of development. But regardless of where they come from, regardless of how I do the test, regardless of what tools I'm using to do the test results should all be treated the same. I should be able to trace all of these. I should be able to see the results. I should be able to get immediate feedback from all of these. And what we find is that for manual testing, this is usually true. Manual testing is really where a lot of companies have good procedures in terms of creating the test cases, linking them to requirements, reporting the results. When it comes to things like automated unit testing, or even a lot of times field testing of items or user acceptance testing, it can get a little bit fuzzy because they sort of happen outside of the normal development teams. In the case of automated unit testing, it's just a program, some test scripts that we run that sort of run automatically, tell me whether they've passed or failed. But regardless of it, they all really need to be treated the same. They have to have traceability. They have to have immediate feedback. And so that's one of the big things that having a tool like Polarian brings, is that gives you a centralized repository to sort of feed all that information in, regardless of where the source is. And lastly, of our sort of five topics, and this is really getting the big picture, is reporting across entire projects, and almost, or sometimes even more importantly, reporting across different projects, right? Having all of your requirements, having your manual test cases, having your automated test cases, having your design in separate tools really inhibits reporting, right? If I have my requirements in an RM tool, if I have my design in a task management, sort of maybe an agile tool, on my test cases in something, a specific test management tool, I can't really report on that unless I either integrate all the items together or I use some sort of third-party reporting tool to sort of pull information out. However, both of those methods have their issues, right? Integrations take time; they're not always perfect. Third-party reporting tools tend not to be actionable; they tend to be out of date. Again, the reports are only as good as the amount of time between when you create it and now. And so, having everything in one centralized repository really means that, you can have everything in separate projects, you'd have everything sort of organized by group, but I can still report across basically my entire repository, all my projects, individual projects, and so forth. And really seeing all these results across projects can really provide a good amount of lessons learned at the end, not just in terms of, what is the best test procedure, how can we make our test procedures more efficient, but also how do I integrate better with the requirements so that we don't have to go back several times to get clarification, or how do I integrate better with development so that our defect management and our change management procedures are much more agile. Just being able to see everything sort of from a large view. At this point, I would like to go into Polarian itself. I have a few demonstration scenarios to go over. We'll just talk a little about viewing, creating, and actually editing both test cases and requirements. We'll show a little bit about establishing traceability from those test cases to requirements so I can see what I need to test and where my holes in coverage are. We'll talk about planning test runs, automatically populating those test runs with the test cases that I want to run. Performing my impact analysis, so if something has changed, knowing where it has affected, importing and executing automated testing, and then finally reporting across the entire project or projects. So let me go ahead and go into Polarian. So this is Polarian. It's a fully web-based system. And we will go ahead and get right into our requirements documents. Let's go ahead and go into user requirement specification. And this is one of the technologies I mentioned in the beginning. Polarian has a very nice document interface that allows me to author and write requirements. But the nice thing about this is that Polarian's user roles and user systems can be defined very precisely. Right? I can set it up so that my test engineers can view into these spaces and view into these documents, read my requirements, see the traceability from their test cases to their requirements, but not actually be able to make any change, and vice versa. Requirements engineers can come in, they can see the test cases that verify the requirements, but maybe they cannot edit them. So it allows you to give good visibility into the system, into all the items that are elsewhere in Polarian, without having to worry that someone who is not authorized or not approved to make changes to a specific section can make changes to a specific section. But if you'll notice in here, if I click on one of the requirements that is in my document, all right, there is an item over here, linked work items derived, that actually shows what items are linked to this work item. And down here as well, what links do I have that from this user requirement? And if I go ahead and click directly on here, this will start to open up our test cases. And in this case, this is actually an automated test case that we brought in from a XUnit file. But you'll see that regardless of it being an automated test case versus a manual test case, they all end up getting linked back to the same requirement. So I can come up here to my requirement, and I can go down even to my other one, 1958 here, and I can see this is my manual test case. And one thing you'll notice is that within the description, within the information, I have first an actual image. So it's possible to paste screenshots directly into the test case description so that if you need some sort of visual information on how to execute the test, that can be added directly into the test case itself. And then we have our test steps down here. And you'll see that these test steps get sort of mirrored into this execute test section. And this really does allow you to sort of break down your test cases into individual steps. Knowing exactly what steps I need to take in order to pass this test case is quite useful and just makes life a lot easier for your test engineers. But when it comes to authoring test cases, there's a few ways we can do this. The first way, if you're used to a sort of a tracker-based test management tool, is directly through the tracker interface. So I can come in here, I can look at all my test cases within my system, and I'm free here to go ahead and create a new test case. So I'll go ahead and create a new test case. This will be audio quality test. And I'll give some information here. I can tell, what release it applies to, what categories it's a part of, what the severity of this is. So this is a detailed test, for example. Any sort of initial estimate that I want. So again, going back to test planning, if I am able to give initial estimates to all my test cases, it becomes a lot easier to sort of plan in terms of time what my test runs are going to take. And then the whole status and resolution of my test case. So I'll come in here, I'll give it a brief description. This is a test to ensure proper audio quality. I'll go ahead and give it test steps. Plug in my phone. Light should light up. I'll add one more row. I'll say talk to microphone. Everyone. So I can go ahead and write my test case, and once I go ahead and create it, you'll see that, again, all this information gets sort of mirrored into the execute test section here. What I'll do here, I'll go ahead and send this to smoke. I'll change the status to activate. And now I have test type. This is a user acceptance test. We'll save. And now I have a active ongoing test case. If I want to, I can even move this into a test specification document. So I'll go ahead and say, let's move it into testing, and I'll move it into my user acceptance test specification. And what I'll see now is that I go into that document, just like I had documents of requirements, I have documents of test cases now. So if you do write your test cases in sort of Microsoft Word and sort of test specification format, this would be very familiar for you. So we see, here's our test specification. And we can even move this, copy, Control X, and paste it there. Save. And now we've just created our new test specification. But now that I have this test specification and I have this user specification, how do I establish the traceability between the two? Right? And unfortunately, something I would really like to happen is to have, eventually there'll be computers that are smart enough to read all my test specifications, read all my requirement specifications, and link the two together. And it is possible now, if you do some scripting, if you do have a particular way of writing your items that makes the algorithms easier to write for that, it is possible, but for the most part, it really takes a human user to say, this is my test case for this requirement. And in Polarian, creating the link is quite easy. I can go ahead and take any requirement that I have. So we'll take AEL 1841. There's a little link over here on the left, and this will allow me to link this requirement to a test case or any other item that's within the system. One thing you'll notice here is that there is an option to choose what type of link rule do I want to have. And this is important because it really gives some context, again, to what is the relationship between these two items. Is this test case just something that is maybe affected by this requirement because it is part of a specific component, or does this test case really verify that requirement? Is the passage of this test case necessary for the implementation of that requirement? So in this case, we'll go ahead and say it verifies. Come down to our new test case here, and we will link the two together. We'll go ahead and save the document that I have. And now when I go ahead and open up this test case, you'll see that in here, there is a new icon. And actually, I put this in the wrong direction between my requirement and my test case. So let's go ahead and go fix this. Let's go ahead and delete this. We'll do it one more time in the proper direction. So let's go ahead. And my apologies for this. One of the nice things about Polarian is that these link rules can have rules assigned to them that prevents you from doing things like I just did and linking it in the wrong direction. In this case, we haven't set this one up quite as well as we should have, but now I have the more proper link rule direction for my test case. So we refresh this. Let's go ahead and open this one up just to make sure I have that linking going on. It does not look like it took, so let's try it one more time. Let's go ahead and save. And there we go. Now we have our requirement, our test case linked together. And so this is great because now my test engineers, whoever gets this auto quality test, has some insight into why are we running this test, what exactly do I need to look out for, what is the purpose of the actual test procedure. And if he's the one who's actually writing the test procedure, he can actually look at the requirement and write a quality, in-depth test procedure for that requirement. Additionally, you can go back and you can tell the requirements engineer easily that, hey, you wrote an untestable requirement. Let's work together to get a good requirement out of this. But just as importantly as actually creating the linking is viewing that linking in the context of the project. And through here, we have a few views that we can do. that we can look at. One is the tree view, and this just gives you a nice tree hierarchical view of all the items in here. One of the nice things about this view is that it's very dynamic, it's very flexible, it's very searchable. So I can say, show me all 4 levels of traceability for my items in this document. It loads up everything from system requirements to test cases to defects and even down to implementing tasks. But if I don't want to see tasks, if I don't want to see defects, I only want to see the requirements and the test cases that they are there to validate those requirements. I can just go ahead and say, show me only those test cases that are those links that are verified as link rule. And so now I've drilled down, I've really focused my view on just requirements and test cases. Here are the requirements, here are the test cases that validate them. In addition to this tree view, we have a nice view as well that is maybe more familiar to you that have to create trace matrices. We have this idea of test case traceability. And what this shows is simply items on the left, these are all the requirements within the system. In this case, we're filtering by targets release version 2.0. We have all the test cases that are verifying these requirements. And we have all the, in this case, open defects that exist in the project related to these test cases. So this gives me a very quick look into, do I have full requirements coverage, right? Do I see any holes in the second column? As well as, do I have any outstanding defects that need to be solved before this release? And it's nice because I can come in here, I can directly click on any one of these, and I can see the information that pertains to it, right? Here's the defect, here's the test that failed, here's all my information for it. So if we go ahead and say, let's go ahead and look at all of my all of my requirements within this project. Now we can start seeing where the holes are. And you'll notice we have some pretty big holes in my requirements coverage here. But because this is fully actionable, because it's fully real time, it makes it easy for me to simply click on the item. So we'll take EL 23 or 231. We'll open up in a new tab here. And we'll go ahead and just create a brand new test case for it right now. So we'll say, create a verified test case. We'll test the display properties. Step 1, count every single pixel. Expected result would be there are a lot of pixels. And we'll say measure, Not the best test case ever written, but it will do for now. But we'll see, as soon as we created this, let's go ahead and activate this. As soon as we've created this, you'll see that we have real-time reporting into here. So if I come up to my refresh button in the pane, refresh this pane, and this was EL231 that we were creating the test case for. And we'll come down here and we'll see EL231. Now we have more complete test coverage, right? It happens immediately. It shows up on my report immediately so that my QA manager, my requirements engineer know right away when an item has been created. And so now it's time sort of to go ahead and actually run my test cases, right? Now that I've ensured that at least the top half has mostly good coverage, let's go ahead and plan my tests and execute them. So for that, we'll come down to our test runs. And one of the things that using a tool like Polarian can really help with is automatically generating my test runs. If I have, 10,000 test cases in my product, I'm not going to be running 10,000 test cases every single time I want to do any testing, right? Maybe I only want to run requirements that are based on a specific test specification, or want to run only those items that are related to a specific function. And what tools like Polarian do is they allow you to create test runs from templates. So I'll go ahead and I'll choose my user acceptance test. I'll say this is UAT 14. 08, and I believe it's the 26/1. I'll create my test run, and what you'll see is that this test run automatically gets populated, in this case, with 9 waiting test cases. This is based on some query that I've wrote as part of this template that says, from this document, testing user acceptance test specification, pick all the test cases that are test type user, and they are a test case, and they are in status active. And this is a simple query. This is something, I've given it these properties that's populated into my test run, but I could really make this much more complicated. Give me all the test cases that are linked to a work item, linked to a requirement that has been updated in the last 7 days. right? So I'm doing my weekly system integration test, for example. I want to see all those items that have been changed in the last week, give me all of those. But it does automatically populate them. You can manually populate them as well. But now I'm ready to assign people to this test run. I'm ready to plan this, give it a due date, maybe a time point, and go on with it. And when I do finally want to execute this test case, I simply click on Execute Test. And now I'm into this section where I can go ahead and start to execute my test. So I'll start with the top one here. I'll say, all right, log into the portal. Open login screen. Sure, this passed. If I want to add an attachment, maybe a screenshot, or maybe a stack trace, something else that's beyond what I can type in the actual results field, go in and add an attachment. But let's just say all of this passed. We'll say, this thing was in, pass, and we'll say this passed. All right, go ahead and pass this, and we go on to our next test case. Log into the e-library portal. Let's say log in fully, was not able to scroll. So we'll pass this first one, we'll fail the second one, and we'll fail the entire test case. Not there. And so even while we're in the process of running these tests in this window, I can come back to my test run, I can refresh this, and I can see sort of what the status of my test run is, right? And for a nine test case test run, this is not so important because I'm probably going to be done with it within the hour, unless they're really, really long test cases. But for a test run that may be thousands of items or several hundreds of items, being able to see sort of real-time ongoing reporting is quite important. Because now I know, look, if something failed, let's just get on this right away. We don't need to wait until everything else has failed in order to start working on this. One thing, too, is that there is a lot of automation that can be built into here. And one thing that we've done out of the box is automated the process of creating defects. What you'll notice is if I do fail a test case, it will create a defect unless there's one that already exists and is attached to it. In that case, it'll just push the information into the defect itself, and you will be able to see all the information down here. Lastly, similar to these test runs, I'm able to actually come in here and import automated testing. So I'm going to go ahead and do a execute a manual upload. We'll call it auto 2014-08-1. Create the test run, and I will go ahead and upload results. And this one here is manual, but this is something that we've automated in the past, being able to take the results from your automated testing tools and automatically bring them into Polarian. What you'll notice as soon as I import this item, all of these items are treated as test cases in Polarian. There's really no difference between this and a manual test case that I've executed, right? I still have the work item, I can still link it, I still create the defects. So everything's brought into one system, everything's treated the same. And it really allows me to do any sort of reporting, any sort of look over the entire system. If I run my test records traceability wiki, now I can see not only the traceability in terms of test coverage, but I can also see now across my entire project what test cases have failed, what test cases have passed, what test cases haven't even been run yet. And again, it doesn't matter if it's an automated test like this one here, EL25, or a manual test like EL388. I can have all of this information in one location. All right. So what I've done today, what I've tried to do for you today is just show you a little bit of how we can make it very easy to view, create, and edit all the test cases and requirements in one location, establish my traceability requirements, planning my test runs, seeing where the impact is for the failures or for the changes, importing and running my automated tests, and then reporting across the entire project. Polarian QA is really just one of 3 solutions that Polarian offers alongside ALM and RM. And we really strive to give the best of, a good quality test and quality management solution and issue and defect management, along with visibility into requirements management, changing configuration, and all your audits, metrics, and reports. We do have a large number of users and a large number of companies who rely on Polarian QA on a daily basis, either in conjunction with their Polarian requirements tools or with other requirements management tools that they have in their organization. And again, I would like to thank you very much for joining us today. I hope this webinar was useful for you. If you are interested, please visit us at www.polarian.com. There we do have free product and tutorial videos. You are free to download 30-day trial, or actually try our product online on our test drive server, or get in contact with one of our sales engineers or account managers and request a proof of concept or a personalized demonstration based around your needs. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any questions, please ask them now in the QA panel. I will try to answer every question that comes in, at least for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Andy. Lots of information there. Appreciate everybody's attendance. As Andy said, we'll stay on the line to take some Q&A. So for those that have to jump off again, thank you very much. Andy, I have a few questions here. So the first one that is being asked is, what do I need to do to import my auto test results? Do I need to put the data in a particular format?
So you do have to have it in a very generalized format. Polarian supports the import of what's called XUnit test results. And it's just an XML file, basically an XML file that's structured in a somewhat specific way. But there is a jobs within Polarian that allow you to customize exactly what sections and what tags within that XML file are being brought into what fields in Polarian. So even if my XML tags are not exactly the same as what Polarian is expecting, it's very easy to customize that. In order to actually do the import process, there's a few ways that I can do it. The first one is what I showed here, where I just simply manually import it into Polarian. Click the import button, select my file, and bring it in. But I also have the ability to set up an automated job so that my automated testing tools may dump all the results into a specific file location, and Polarian can go out and they pick those files on a regular basis and bring them in automatically. And the last one is actually creating a full-fledged integration between the two. It's a little bit outside the scope of today's presentation, but that's something that we've done with our partners and some of our customers have done on their own.
Thanks, Andy. The next question up is, obviously there's lots of testing tools out there. What's the best tool for automated testing?
So that is a question that I cannot really answer. The best tool for automated testing is obviously the one that fits your needs. And so it's really a question of what you need to do with your automated testing. Are you required to do very, very deep static and dynamic analysis for regulatory agencies? In that case, you might want to get a large, or sort of a deeper, more fully featured automated tool like something like VectorCAS or LDRA or Parasoft, something on that level. But if you're doing, for example, automated testing of your user experience, right? That's something that maybe you'd want to use something like more like Selenium or another user interface testing tool, a graphical testing tool. So I can't really answer that question for you. It's really something that you have to decide. What are your needs? What level of testing do I want? So some people are just fine with doing JUnit automated testing, writing their test scripts in JUnit and then executing as part of their build process. And so it's really, what are your needs? What sort of compliance do I need? What do I want to test? One of the nice things about Polarian is we really don't care about what testing tools you use. We treat all the test cases the same regardless of where they come from. And so as long as it exports in a file that we can read, or at least as long as there's some sort of API that we can integrate with, it really doesn't matter what tool you are using. The next question that came in is, for automated testing, do I have to follow a standard order, or am I free to state the order myself? And so this is a great question. I'm going to answer this both in regards to automated testing and actually manual testing as well. For automated testing, it absolutely does not matter what order you execute the test in. Your automated testing tool may specify a specific order that it wants things tested in, or you may have a specific procedure in place that specifies that. But as far as from Polarian's side, we don't really care what the order is. As long as we get the test case, as long as we get the expected result, and as long as we get the test case, the actual result, and the actual the verdict itself, whatever order it is in doesn't really matter. It can be the order that you specify, it could be the order that your tool specifies. As long as they're brought in, Polarian doesn't really care too much. When it comes to manual testing, when it comes to how Polarian presents those items, again, it's really up to you. Polarian can order those items in any order you want based on the fields that it has, right? So if you have a specific priority for items, or if you have a specific order that you want your test cases executed in, Polarian can definitely do that. But it doesn't necessarily have to fix the engineer to that order. So if they want to jump around and execute the ones that they know they can get done the quickest first, that's up to them. And it's really up to the system configurator to decide if I want it to be a strict order, or if I want them to be much more flexible.
Great. Thanks, Andy. That concludes our webinar for today, as well as our Q&A. And on behalf of Polarian Software, we thank you very much for your time today, and thank you, Andy, as well. Goodbye.